Well, the Washington Post gets it. The Washington Post understands the threat, the enormity of the threat to the United States delivered by Pennsylvania's Republican voters Tuesday night. In an editorial under the headline, "After the Pennsylvania primary, the threat to U.S. democracy rises," the Washington Post says, quote, "Republican voters overwhelmingly nominated State Senator Doug Mastriano, one of the country's most ardent deniers of the 2020 presidential election result. If Mr. Mastriano is elected in November, he could directly threaten U.S. democracy going forward." That's all it takes to destroy the absurdly fragile electoral machinery that produces a winner in American presidential elections. Just one person. That's all it takes. One breathtakingly ignorant, pathological liar. That's all it takes to end any semblance of democracy in presidential elections. Pennsylvania State Senator Doug Mastriano was at Donald Trump's January 6th rally and was seen near the grounds of the Capitol after Donald Trump told everyone to march to the Capitol and that he would march with them. After Donald Trump told them to fight like hell, Doug Mastriano was at the Capitol, at minimum, watching them fight like hell. He is under investigation by the January 6th committee. The committee subpoenaed him. He has not responded to the subpoena. And now we know that Attorney General Merrick Garland's Justice Department is conducting a criminal investigation of the same elements that the January 6th committee is investigating. And so Doug Mastriano, Republican candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, might be under federal criminal investigation right now for his attempts to overturn the presidential election. And Pennsylvania Republican voters say that's exactly who we want in charge of the next presidential election in Pennsylvania. Now, we don't normally think of governors as being in charge of elections because they are not supposed to be. At most, in some states, a governor's signature appears on a form certifying the electoral result. The Washington Post says that Mastriano would do much more than that. Quote, "There is little doubt he would use his authority to reject free and fair election results should the voters favor a Democratic candidate. In Pennsylvania, the governor appoints the Secretary of State. And so if election liar Doug Mastriano is elected governor of Pennsylvania, he will also be the de facto Secretary of State of Pennsylvania because he will appoint a Secretary of State who will do exactly what he wants and overturn the election outcome in Pennsylvania if a Democrat wins the presidential election there. And a Republican-controlled Congress could then accept the fake electors sent by an election criminal operating as Pennsylvania's governor. None of this could be happening if we did not live under the immoral plague the founders called the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a standing crime against democracy. It never got in the way of democracy until the year 2000 because the winner of the most votes in the presidential election always turned out to be the winner of the most electoral votes in the Electoral College. Then came George W. Bush, installed as president by the Electoral College after coming in second to Al Gore with American voters. 16 years later, the same happened for Donald Trump, who came in an even more distant second to Hillary Clinton with voters. The Republican Party and Republican presidential candidates like Donald Trump have no possible plan to ever win the most votes in a presidential campaign again. They've given up on that. The only way Donald Trump can become president again is by winning the Electoral College or by stealing the Electoral College. And so Donald Trump has endorsed the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania who tried to steal the Electoral College for Donald Trump once before. Much of the Democratic structure that the founders created in this country has been copied in newer democracies around the world. The one thing that no other country in the world has ever adopted is the Electoral College because it is so obviously recognized worldwide as a crime against democracy. Each of the 50 states is a democracy. Governors are elected in a purely democratic election. So are mayors. So are United States senators. It is only in presidential elections that voters don't get their way. One Republican in Colorado now wants to institute an electoral college within the state of Colorado for the election of governor of Colorado because Republicans see no other way to win a statewide election for governor of Colorado. No plot to steal a presidential election could work without the Electoral College. Therefore, we should obviously abolish the Electoral College, but we never will because that requires a constitutional amendment, which requires a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate, and that will never happen. The Washington Post is urging action on reforming the Electoral Count Act of 1887 so that it would be more difficult to steal an Electoral College victory in the states or in Congress. Senator Chris Murphy, who is working on that bill, told the Washington Post, hopefully the Pennsylvania results crystallize the coming threat. According to a new report by a group of voting rights organizations, in the first 4 months of this year, 229 bills were introduced in 33 states that would allow state legislatures to meddle in elections. The report concludes, left unchecked, these legislative proposals threaten to paralyze the smooth functioning of elections. Election administrators could be left powerless to stop voter intimidation. Election rules could devolve into a confusing and contradictory tangle, subject to change at the whims of partisan lawmakers. Election results could be endlessly called into question and subjected to never-ending destructive reviews conducted based on no responsible standard. At the extreme, election results could simply be tossed aside and the will of the people ignored. That is what the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania tried to do in 2020 and will do if elected governor. If the Democratic nominee for governor in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, is elected governor, he will appoint a Secretary of State who will do what every Pennsylvania Secretary of State has always done, follow the law, and report the honest count of votes in the election and certify the candidate with the most votes as the winner. The Washington Post says, nothing else matters. Quote, general election voters must reject candidates who, either through delusion or partisan calculation, deny valid election results. Inflation, the Ukraine war, gasoline prices, the COVID-19 pandemic, none of these issues are as important as preserving the democratic order. Americans should vote like it. Today, the Senate Rules Committee, chaired by Senator Amy Klobuchar, had a hearing on election integrity. Testifying at that hearing today were secretaries of state, election officials, and experts, including Leah Chapman, the acting Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, who will join our discussion tonight.
It is especially disturbing that some disinformation has come from those with a sworn duty to defend our democratic process. The November 2020 election in Pennsylvania, like every election since, was free, fair, and secure. Allegations of illegal activity in Pennsylvania's 2020 presidential election have been repeatedly dismissed in more than 24 federal court cases and debunked by independent fact-checkers. Repeating this falsehood over and over harms our democracy and voters' confidence in our elections process.